Hello, my beautiful friends, my fellow space blobs and earth blobs and sparkly blobs, or whatever poetic form you are using to describe yourself and your process in this season of your life. I am here for it. And if you are new here, my name is Sarah, and I'm all about creating tarot and astrology conversations and spaces that allow for the sensitive spirits of the world to feel safe in them, to feel like we are empowered to re-enter our connection with the mystical in a way that feels really grounded, really safe, and also reminds us that our sensitivity and our tendency to feel things deeply is part of this whole great mystery, and just to help us feel a lot of safety as we use these tools in exploring ourselves and exploring our becoming in the world. And I think that's so important for conversations like a full moon in Scorpio. This is one of my favorite full moons of every year. Every year, this full moon just seems to illuminate some really important things for me, help me process, help me see with clarity. I have an attraction towards Scorpio energy. I have some strong placements in Scorpio, and it's always been one of those important places for me to get to really deep, truthful places. I have a feeling a lot of you out there also deeply connect with Scorpio energy. So I already have an affinity for the Scorpio full moon in general, but this particular Scorpio full moon is so medicinal and helpful as we enter into Taurus season here. It's happening just after Taurus season begins on April 23rd, and it's going to help us close out eclipse season and kind of incorporate what those waves of energy that we just moved through the course of Aries season, what that all was about. It's going to also help illuminate how we've been changing and maybe what some of these new waves of energy are asking of us, and just kind of helping us to illuminate like what just happened. How do I allow this to kind of translate into my body, into my life, into what is coming next in this season of life? It's going to be a really, really helpful full moon for helping us feel a little bit more in touch with ourselves and a little bit clearer about what's really going to matter over the next 6 months as we work with the waves of energy that came through during eclipse season. So let's talk about some of the big themes of this beautiful full moon in Scorpio. And then I will pull a few cards at the end and just do an intuitive tarot chat with you all to just feel through and enjoy and savor. So let's get into it. The first theme I want to explore is the opposition of Taurus and Scorpio here, with the sun 4 degrees of Taurus and the moon 4 degrees of Scorpio. Full moons always bring us that beautiful oppositional energy that can kind of help us get perspective on life. And Taurus Scorpio is just one of those building blocks of existence. It's death and renewal. It's the creative axis. It's the shadow and the light. It's the creation and the destruction, and how intertwined these two things are, that they're really two sides of the same coin, and that this is really where so much of our creative inspiration comes from. It really takes us back to some essential ingredients of what it feels like to live in this organic world and in this energetic world, and how energy is constantly renewing and changing form and changing shape. And these are two fixed signs, right? Taurus and Scorpio, these fixed sign energetics, which you would think are about retaining the same shape. But when you really take a closer look at Taurus and Scorpio, it's all about how we sustain ourselves through change. How do we befriend change? How do we become more deeply engaged with it in a way that actually allows us to work with it rather than against it? The long game of life is that we will always be changing form. And even though culture has told us time and again that it's about finding one static form and holding on to it for 30 years, we find time and again that that's really not the case, is it? Even when we've tried our best, even when that would be really nice and really comforting to hold the same form, turns out we keep changing anyway. And so whenever the Scorpio full moon comes up every year, I feel like this is just a really great opportunity to connect in with those waves of change. How are they feeling right now? You know, what is feeling like it's just not fitting the same, really isn't quite who you are in this moment that's wanting to be released, that's wanting to change form? What longings are you noticing coming up when it comes to that? What is wanting to come in? Like what's been tapping at your window, but you maybe haven't created space for it, or it just feels like it's too inconvenient, or it'll get in the way of other people? Where are you wanting to carve out space for that creative project, or for that researching what might be possible with a new idea of who you're going to be? This is a really, really beautiful time to just kind of take stock of those things. Like I mentioned, this is the full moon that really closes out our eclipse season as well, by just allowing to kind of bring it to conclusion energetically. So this is a really great time too to just notice what eclipse season brought in when it comes to how you're changing, what's wanting to come in, what's wanting to leave, what doesn't feel like it fits quite the same way. I think this is also a really wonderful opposition, and this is kind of one of the core themes of this full moon in Scorpio, is that when we're looking at kind of some of our old patterning, the places where we kind of hold on because we're really afraid, which is understandable and relatable and definitely not something to be hard on ourselves about, but where are we kind of holding on because we're very afraid, and we're afraid that changing is going to kind of destroy everything about ourselves? And how can we help ourselves feel a little safer in that? So right at the core of this full moon, we're having that conversation. And then we get into our second theme, which has to do with our friend Pluto over in Aquarius. Now, we have been starting to really work with this Pluto and Aquarius energy, get our feet wet, kind of understand how that is feeling for the larger collective. And we're just at the very tip of that journey. But it's really interesting because this full moon in Scorpio is going to be loosely squaring Pluto in Aquarius. And Pluto is the ruler of Scorpio. So this is a really fun conversation. So for me, this is really about looking at places of disempowerment in our lives. You know, a lot of us learned early on in childhood that if we were a little too fanciful, if we were getting a little too excited, the adults around us would often say, hey, you're feeling a little too good, like tamp it down a few notches. It's just like a lot for me to deal with right now. And so many of us learned that, you know, being overexcited, being overenthusiastic might come with some kind of shutting down or punishment. Maybe not all of us, but even those of us who lived in very happy childhoods or really healthy families, I think you still learn this by culture, right? So a lot of us have these places where it feels like if I excel, if I open myself to the world and I go for those things that I really love, part of the fear is that, you know, you'll get shut down at some point, or that there will be some kind of punishment or follow-up retribution that might come. And I think this is a really wonderful opportunity to just kind of think about some of those places that where we have felt disempowered historically, where we might have an association with expressing ourselves or being ourselves that has historically maybe felt dangerous or scary. And to kind of look at those and see if they are playing any role in how we're thinking of what we want to embody next. You know, what role is it playing? Is it playing a role? Maybe it's not. Maybe you are somebody who has done a lot of work on this and you're in a very different place with it. Maybe you do find that it is playing a role. I have been finding this a lot with my visioning for the next cycle of my life, that I will often kind of hold myself back. And I've noticed it has to do with some of these places of disempowerment. You know, so what happens when we allow ourselves to try something new? How does it feel? Does it feel safe? Does it feel scary? Does it feel like we're breaking a rule? Does it feel like it's too much? If we feel like we're getting into a really empowered place, are we worried that we're going to be inconvenient for other people or upset other people or disappoint other people? You know, where do you feel the most scared in the creative process and the self-expressive process? You know, how can you, and then I think this is the follow-up question really with all of this. Once you kind of know where you have places where you may feel disempowered, scared, worried, where you don't want to rock the boat too much, how can you prepare yourself and your space and your process in a way that will account for these parts of yourself, that will care for these parts of yourself, that will allow you to get curious about these parts of yourself, and without them having to carry the role of being in charge of all of your safety. This is a really great opportunity to kind of hear what those fears and those places of disempowerment have been saying over the years, as well as to really make a game plan for how you want to acknowledge that they are going to be there as you start to self-express in new ways. Like, they're going to show up, they're going to have something to say, they're probably going to be worried about things. But when we know and acknowledge that those things are going to be along on the journey of our becoming and our expressing, we can actually accommodate them in a better way that then allows us to keep pursuing our own sense of self and expression. So this is a really great full moon to also just really practically think about how you want to help those parts of yourself, and just illuminating where we are making life choices based on some of those historic experiences. And do we want to keep doing that? That's the question. And that's a question that each of us is going to have to answer on our own terms, in our own time, in our own revealing way. And sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes it's like, yeah, right now I can't do that. And sometimes the answer is yes. So it's a really, really self-exploratory full moon and opposition here with Pluto in Aquarius. The final theme here that is so beautiful and a really fun undercurrent to this entire full moon is that Uranus and Jupiter in Taurus are meeting up right now. And they are having this big meetup that only happens about every 14 years in Taurus. And it's a really interesting conversation. You know, Uranus is all about innovation. And what happens if we fill in the blank? You know, Uranus just wants to find out what happens next. That's often how I like to describe that energy. Sometimes people say it's about, destroying things and disrupting things and causing chaos. That can be one lens through which you can look at this idea. But I think, in essence, Uranus is really interested in innovation and not holding the same form and not keeping up with the status quo. What happens then? It's very mischievous energy in a way. And then, of course, Jupiter is that eternal optimist, but also taking a big lens view of the process of life. What does that look like? What are we wanting to create next? What is coming up? So both of these energies are very much about what happens next. They're not looking so much at the past like the moon in Scorpio might be doing, which is, I think, does involve deep archaeology into our spirits and our psyches and our bodies and the histories that are there. So important. But this Uranus-Jupiter conjunction in Taurus is really interesting because it's like, that's all great, but I want to know what's next. And I actually love that this is going on in the background because I think these two things go hand in hand. Where we do excavation, where we do self-exploration, where we understand a pattern, a place of fear, a place of disempowerment, there we also unlock one of our next innovations, our next dreams, our next openness. And so I think these two go really, really well together. So this conjunction is somewhat rare. And for me, in Taurus here, I think what's important is to think about this idea of sustainability. I think I brought it up in the Taurus season discussion where I was talking about feeling safe in change, feeling safe in our creative process, that what's really important there is figuring out what sustains each of us. And each of us is going to have our own unique roadmap when it comes to this. But I think this full moon and this Jupiter-Uranus conjunction is a really great place to think about, like, what sustains you. So that, when you're going through the mundane day of pursuing that vision or that experience or that self-expression that you want to have next in life, what works for you? What makes you feel safe? What makes you feel just enough challenged so that you feel excited about it, but not like you're overextended? What helps you feel like you're really in a good groove? When do you need to take a break and say, okay, that's enough for today? This is a really great place to explore what your map looks like for sustainable change. Because in Taurus, these energies, yes, they're interested in what happens next and innovation and exploring and playing and crafting. But if we do that in ways that just fry out our circuits over and over again, we kind of end up in the same loops. So part of this conversation is about how do we do it in a way that doesn't burn us out, that doesn't fry us, that doesn't leave us feeling like it's just this up and down cycle of hope and despair and like productivity and crashing, all of that. What does it look like for you? And how do you help the parts of yourself that are based on those old historic patterns or those fears or those places of disempowerment feel safe enough to go with you on some of these new journeys? So all of these questions are really prominent in this full moon, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see what naturally comes up. I really honestly suggest just like witness yourself around this full moon. I think each of us will probably have our own unique revelations and realizations, and we don't necessarily have to sit down and journal our way through it. If you like doing that, we are going to be doing an activation over on Patreon where I'm going to be doing a visualization to allow some of this energy to move through. But you could also just go through your day and just kind of witness yourself and notice what comes up. I think it would be really interesting. Let's finish out our time together here today with a couple of intuitive tarot cards. If you are interested in exploring tarot and imagery with me, I would love to see you over on my Patreon. We are moving our way slowly and gently through the major arcana, and I'm slowly investing time in each of these archetypes and really allowing them to awaken and exploring just the practice of tarot with everyone there. So if you are interested, I would love to see you in that space and share that with you. I'll leave the link in the description if you're interested, and just enjoying the lusciousness of the major arcana. In the autumn, we're going to be doing the minor arcana, and I'm really excited about it. 5 of Wands. This is really interesting. I haven't seen this card for a little bit, but it's so helpful here. And I'm going to pull a companion card to that. I want to keep the reading quite simple today and really focus in on what energies are moving through. And the star. There's that Pluto in Aquarius energetic that is so prominent right now in the collective energy. Quite the pairing. And I think it's always so interesting to see what comes up when you do 2 cards, because a lot of times you'll get these 2 strands of energetics that are deeply interlinked while they look so disparate. The 5 of Wands is really important, and 5s in tarot are these powerful places of tension and growth where we kind of face something and feel something and notice something and acknowledge something that's not working, something that feels a little off, something that needs acknowledgement. And the 5 of Wands, of course, when you see this card, it looks on the surface like it's about conflict. And there is conflict in this card. And what I've always found fascinating about this card is that it kind of makes me think about internal family systems in all of our parts. Like, it also makes me think about family history and cultural history. We have all these different parts just getting in there, and there's so much noise and there's so much tension. And that's actually important, because when we look at the places where there is tension, where there is discomfort, where there is something that just does not feel like it is in conversation anymore, this is a really powerful place to discover ourselves, to unlock our energy, to understand why we kind of feel like we're in a stalemate. And a lot of times when you look at this card, while on the one hand it denotes the sense of action and movement in the world, on the other hand, it can often look like people who are just stuck, in this fight stance. And I think that's often the case for the parts of ourselves that have different views on our changing selves. Like the part of us that's like, this is not safe, we should not do this. And the part of ourselves that says this is the best idea ever. Like, these 2 things are often kind of in a deadlock. So how can they communicate? Why do they disagree? Do they have interests in common? This is a really great place to look at those places of tension and stuckness where we're just feeling a little bit off because maybe we're holding the same shape for too long. We're acceding to some of our fears or some of the places in ourselves that say, I can't handle it. Or maybe, we're just not listening to our longings, where we're wanting a shift or a change. And that can include things that we need to scale back on. It's not always about like bigger, better you. It can also be about places where we've been pushing too hard, where we've been frying our circuits, and just looking at those places of tension, unresolved places, and giving them a little bit of space to breathe. Now, like I mentioned, with the excavation energetics of the Scorpio full moon, paired with some of this kind of technicolor visioning energy of Pluto and Aquarius, of Jupiter and Uranus and Taurus, we have the star here, which is the great visioner, and does take us to some new places, some new dreams. A lot of times the tagline for the star card is, your wish comes true, something along those lines. But I think that's always been kind of like a simplistic rendering of this, because what's really going on here is connecting to our soul song, connecting to what we really mean, what we really want, what we're really longing for. And I think that when I see this combo of cards, what I see is in being willing to sit with the places that are feeling a little bit landlocked, a little bit tense, a little bit uncomfortable, we unlock our ability to see what we want, what we're longing for, what we're dreaming of, what we're actually wishing for. Martha Beck says that the universe wants to give you your wishes, but it can only deliver them to your true home address. So if you're ordering wishes and longing for things from some place that's not really from your soul song, you're like, but I should want this. It can feel like it's kind of stuck, like it never quite arrives. But when we're really dreaming from our truest self, things move a little bit differently. So I think too, as we close out this conversation with these two cards, it's a really great place to just think about where we're dreaming from. Are we forcing ourselves to dream in one way? And what is our true longing? What is the thing that we're actually longing for, but we often disallow on ourselves because it will mean change, it will mean rocking the boat, or it might challenge some parts of ourselves that are convinced it could destroy us. This is just one of those classic full moons where we're just looking at that whole archaeology of a whole architecture of the way we are conversing with ourselves when it comes to our longings and our dreams. And is it working for us? And how do we want to shift those things? So it's going to be a really powerful full moon. Like I mentioned, I'm going to be doing an activation, a little visualization over on my Patreon for this full moon. It's going to be really soothing. We're going to visit the Midnight Garden and give ourselves some peace to allow energy to move through. And I'm also going to be walking us through the major arcana. And if you have not joined, you can catch up on all the episodes so far and join us for the second half of the major arcana. I would love to see you there for that. I love it when you stick around here. How does this full moon feel for you? How are you feeling at the end of Aries season and the beginning of Taurus season? What's been coming up for you? I would love to hear your thoughts. I love you all so much. I will see you here super soon for our next moon discussion, the new moon in Taurus, and to just talk about some of the themes coming up in my life and some of the thoughts and questions that have been coming up in my creative process. So I hope to see you back here for all of those, and I'm sending you so much love.